in your fucking boss. Oh, how's it going, Leg? Hello, Faraday. Whoa, what the fuck are you coming from? They come from everywhere! This is... Ow!
One of the oldest tricks in level design is something called a spawn closet. Let's talk about what they are, which problems they solve, and how we can use them. One of the most common challenges a player faces in video games are enemies to overcome. Whether it's dodging them, jumping on their heads to take them out, sneaking past them all stealthily, or taking them out in a firefight, as level designers, we're responsible for distributing them in the level and often directing their behavior. But in video game development, as well as trying to create fun and engaging moments, we're always facing practical and technical limitations. Because we only have limited processing power and memory available, and enemies tend to be quite costly due to their level of visual detail, or their complicated logic running at all times. Even the AAA games I worked on, we always had strict budgets for how many enemies could be active at once. Clever tricks that let us maximize the use of the limited enemies we had were always greatly appreciated. We usually can't have all enemies active across the playable world at all times, and on many occasions we'd like to introduce additional enemies into an encounter, either as continuous waves to provide an extra challenge to the player, or as a consequence of player actions, for example triggering an alarm in games that have a stealth component. One of the established tools we have as level designers is called a spawn closet, also referred to as a monster closet. The earliest examples of spawn or monster closets I can find are from the original 1993's Doom. Because Doom couldn't create new enemies during gameplay, designers hid monsters inside inaccessible rooms that sometimes simply opened up, revealing new enemies behind the door, or were otherwise used to teleport monsters into the playable area. Those monster closets have since become a classic way of bringing more enemies into the level, like in Half-Life 2 with doors opening revealing enemy reinforcements, enemies bursting through the ground or closed doors, and is still used frequently in modern titles. Like we did on Star Wars Outlaws, where we wanted to justify enemy reinforcements arriving after a triggered alarm or for scripted story beats from places that made sense in the world, like doors, corridors, or nearby buildings, instead of simply appearing beside the player. Let's look at a practical example of when and how we might want to use spawn closets in our level layout. Let's say we have a combat arena that's normally part of a larger level layout or even an open world. Usually, in open world games, we only activate logic and spawn enemies when the player gets close enough, so they're definitely spawned in when the player arrives, but don't need to be active at all times when the player is on the other side of the world. But what do we do when the player has eliminated those enemies, and instead of this encounter being over immediately afterwards, we want other enemies to arrive and keep the tension going? If we just spawn them into existence, the player would see them appearing out of nowhere. In some games, like Control, this fits the thematic and is perfectly fine, but in many games this would break the player's suspension of disbelief and therefore ruin the immersion. We could distribute some spawns in more hidden corners of the map and behind objects, and use a combination of distance checks and verifying if the player is looking away from the spawn point to hide the spawning of enemies, which is definitely something that is done in plenty of games, though not every layout and situation is suited for this, and often results in us having to spawn the enemies pretty far away. And the player might be left wondering where all those enemies came from, with no obvious entry point being visible anywhere. If we want to spawn enemies closer to the action, we can add some spawn closets to our layout. We can still try to apply the same logic to them, trying to spawn enemies out of sight, but we don't have to be as strict about it, as when the player does catch enemies spawning, it's completely justified by them emerging from a sensible location. If you do allow players to enter these spawn closets at all, it just being a small empty room makes it feel like the enemies were just bunched up in there waiting to jump out at the player. So keep in mind to justify their origin by, for example, adding some extra uninteractable doors that justify them arriving from another part of the complex. Now, of course, a spawn closet doesn't have to be some little enclosed room, and as a designer, you're free to come up with different visual variations that feel natural to your world building. Like we did on Dead Island 2, with zombies crawling out of mud or sand piles, sewer grates, and various types of vents. Or you could have reinforcements show up by car or helicopter, like in the Far Cry series, dramatically cutting the time it takes for them to reach the ongoing encounter space. Or like we did in Ark Raiders, drop enemies into the level from orbit, which isn't only visually exciting and gives us more freedom in respawning enemies, but is consistent with the world's fiction, so the player immediately accepts where the enemies came from. All these different spawn methods have a different presentation and implementation, but serve to address the design problem of the player has already seen this room, but how do I add new enemies to the space without them simply appearing? So get creative and find ways to implement enemy spawns in a way that fits the thematic of the world that you're building. If you would like to support me and see more level design content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and possibly hit the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video.